Greetings, fellow readers and story lovers, and welcome back to my channel. There's currently a heat wave going on in my country and across most of Europe, so if you see me sweating during this video or if my makeup decides to run off my face, that's why. Unfortunately, Sundays are my only reliable filming days, so we're just gonna have to embrace it and get on with it. Pride Month is over now, and that means it's time to get back to Shakespeare. We're still talking about Romeo and Juliet, and last time we left off at the end of Act 3, Scene 1. The next few videos are going to be about Act 3, Scene 5. But since it's been a minute since my last Shakespeare video, let's do a little bit of a recap of the last 4 scenes we talked about. We started off with the very first scene of the play, which introduces us to the Capulet-Montague feud, an ancient grudge that's been going on for so long that nobody even bothers to ask questions anymore. A fight can erupt out of literally nowhere, and everyone, including regular old citizens that have nothing to do with the feud, jump in and hit whoever's in front of them. This shows that Verona itself is a city governed by violence. It has a ruler, the prince, but he frequently shows up too late to stop the fighting. In Act 1, Scene 1, he arrives when the fight has already escalated to a full-on brawl in the streets and can't do much more than issue a royal decree threatening to sentence the next person who starts a public fight to death, which ramps up the stakes and creates a nice bit of foreshadowing because the audience already knows, due to the first prologue, that more deaths are coming. The first scene also introduces us to Romeo, who is a young man governed by his emotions. He starts the play completely heartbroken over a girl named Rosalind, who never appears on stage, by the way. But when he first lays eyes on Juliet in Act 1, Scene 5, he forgets all about her and becomes ride or die for Juliet all the way. Let's look at how that happens, shall we? Act 1, Scene 5 marks the inciting incident of the play. It's where our two main characters meet. The Capulets host a ball at their house, and Romeo and his friends, Benvolio and Mercutio, have decided to sneak in. Originally because Romeo wants to woo his beloved Rosalind, but almost as soon as he enters, he sees Juliet, falls head over heels in love with her, and declares her the most beautiful person he's ever seen in his life. Poor Rosalind, am I right? This declaration of love is overheard by Tybalt, who immediately wants to kill Romeo. Luckily, Lord Capulet steps in and orders his nephew to stand down. Tybalt doesn't like being told what to do, and Lord Capulet doesn't like being talked back to, so they argue. Note that Lord Capulet starts out being the more reasonable party in this argument. He doesn't want Tybalt to literally kill someone on his dance floor, but loses his temper pretty quickly when Tybalt doesn't immediately back down. This lets us know two things. One, his control over his family members isn't as absolute as he would like it to be. And in Shakespeare's time, that would have been considered a bit of a problem because the head of the household was expected to have complete authority over all members of his family. And two, his temper is extremely volatile. Put a pin in that one because we're going to have to come back to this in the next video. Lord Capulet and Tybalt's argument ends with Tybalt backing down but swearing revenge on Romeo before exiting the scene. Romeo and Juliet meet and share a dance and a conversation which takes the form of a sonnet. This shows how instant their connection is and how immediately they understand each other. Their romantic moment is immediately undercut, however, when they find out at the end of the party that they belong to rivaling households. Romeo is a bit put out by this, but Juliet downright despairs. My only love sprung from my only hate, too early seen unknown, and known too late. Prodigious birth of love it is to me, that I must love my loathed enemy. This lets us know that she is far more aware of the practical consequences of the love than Romeo is. While he is still caught up in the romance of the moment, Juliet immediately recognizes the predicament this puts them in. She is also far more rational than he is. which is a character trait that definitely carries over into the next scene that we looked at. Act 2, Scene 2 is known as the famous balcony scene, despite there being no mentions of any balconies in the actual text. Romeo has snuck into the Capulet orchard, hoping to catch a glimpse of Juliet. The way he talks about her makes it incredibly obvious how completely infatuated he is with her. He calls her the sun, compares her eyes to two of the fairest stars in all the heaven, and lifts her up into the heaven by calling her both a bright angel and a winged messenger of heaven. All of these are things that Romeo has to physically and metaphorically look up to, emphasizing the fact that he is idealizing Juliet to the point of not even viewing her as entirely human. He is the mortal standing below, looking up to this heavenly figure that, according to his own metaphors, does not belong in the human world. His language, however unintentionally, already makes it clear to the audience that their love is not something that can safely exist in the mortal realm. Juliet, on the other hand, is rational, realistic, and downright philosophical at times. She has already correctly identified that their biggest problem is going to be their social identities, namely that they belong to rivaling families. In her famous soliloquy, she repeats the words name, Romeo, and Montague several times, indicating how important family relationships are, both to her and in the play overall, and her solution to this predicament is quietly radical, especially for a woman in this time period. She suggests several times that either she or Romeo give up their names and therefore their social identities. Deny thy father and refuse thy name, or if thou wilt not, be but sworn my love, and I'll no longer be a Capulet. And I know I've emphasized this point several times throughout my videos, but this scene, Act 2, Scene 2, takes place on the same night as the Capulet Ball, so Romeo and Juliet have only just met. And yet, Juliet is already willing to give up her entire world for Romeo. However, she does not do so lightly. She asks Romeo for commitment, and he rises to the occasion by offering to marry her, which Juliet agrees to, so they get married in Friar Lawrence's cell the very next day. This means that their wedding takes place less than 24 hours after their first meeting and about 36 hours after the play's opening, which is a deliberate choice that Shakespeare has made. In his source material, a narrative poem by Arthur Brooke, the story takes place over the course of several months. Shakespeare has shortened the timeline to just a couple of days, which turns Romeo and Juliet into a tragedy of speed. The events of the story happen too quickly for any of the characters to do anything about the tragic outcome that they inevitably lead to. And nowhere does this become more evident than in Act 3, Scene 1. This scene marks the turning point of the play. Romeo and Juliet has always been a tragedy. The prologue calls Romeo and Juliet a pair of star-crossed lovers, which means their tragic ending is literally written in the stars. But through the events of this scene, the tragedy moves from inevitable to irrevocable. By the end of the scene, two people are dead. Tybalt has killed Mercutio for relentlessly teasing him with pun after pun, and Romeo has killed Tybalt in revenge for his friend's death. This represents a marked shift in Romeo's behavior, from lovesick teenager to revenge seeker. However, I would like to point out that this is not entirely out of character for him. From the very first time we see him, he has been governed by his emotions. It's just that those emotions so far have been love and infatuation, and in Act 3, Scene 1, it shifts to anger. However, as soon as Tybalt is dead, Romeo regrets his actions and calls himself Fortune's fool. Put a pin in that too, because in the next scene, we're gonna see a pretty stark difference between Romeo and Juliet's attitude towards fate, so watch out for that one. The prince, who once again shows up fashionably late when all the action is already over, decides to merely banish Romeo instead of sentencing him to death, because he acknowledges that Romeo did not start the fight and only acted in response to Tybalt's violence. Lady Capulet does not like this at all. But once again, we're gonna have to put a pin in that because we're gonna look at that in more detail in the next video. For now, let's take a look at scenes 2, 3, and 4 of Act 3 before we dive into Act 3, Scene 5, the focal point of the next few videos. Act 3, Scene 2 starts with Juliet alone in her room, waiting for night to come so that she and Romeo can be together. However, the nurse comes in and dampens the mood a little by telling Juliet about Tybalt's death and Romeo's banishment. It is worth noting that she at first makes it sound as though Romeo is dead and Juliet immediately wants to join him in death, which is very unsubtle foreshadowing of the ending. The nurse then corrects herself and tells Juliet that it is Tybalt who is dead and Romeo is the one who killed him. She also curses Romeo for his actions, which makes Juliet instantly angry with her, which shows her incredible loyalty to Romeo, even despite his murderous actions. Juliet is so distraught over hearing that Romeo is banished that she says she will go to her wedding bed and death will take her maidenhead. Now, if you remember from one of my earliest videos in this series, maidenhead is another word for virginity. So essentially, Juliet is saying that she will be married to death, which is just another way for her to say that she'll kill herself if she can't be with Romeo. Honestly, for someone who has spent much of the play being the practical one, this is a remarkably Romeo like reaction from her. It seems that love has brought out a somewhat unstable side of her. The nurse is clearly worried about her well being too, because she immediately offers to go and fetch Romeo, and that's the end of the scene. I do want to point out that there seems to be a pattern in this play that is worth paying attention to. In Act 1, Scene 5, Romeo sees Juliet and instantly falls in love with her, which is immediately followed by Tybalt threatening to kill him. In this scene, Juliet is excited to see Romeo and spend the night with him, but her excitement is immediately dampened by the nurse who tells her that Tybalt has been killed by Romeo. So it seems that Romeo and Juliet's love is always followed by death. But let's move on to the next scene. Now, Act 3, Scene 3 gives us Romeo's perspective. He is with Friar Lawrence in his cell, and the friar informs him of the prince's decision to let him live and simply banish him from Verona. For Romeo, however, this is truly a fate worse than death. He says multiple times that he'd rather die than be separated from his beloved Juliet. The friar tries to calm him down, but Romeo simply cannot be reasoned with. When the nurse arrives and tells him that Juliet is upset, he immediately wants to kill himself. He truly is an impulsive little bugger, isn't he? The friar continues to act as the voice of reason in this whole mess of a situation and comes up with a plan. Romeo is to go to Juliet and comfort her so that they both survive the night. Then, before morning comes, he is supposed to leave and go to Mantua to show that he respects the prince's banishment. Once there, he and Juliet can announce their marriage and ask the prince to pardon Romeo. Now, if that all sounds reasonable to you, then you would be correct, which of course means that this is not what's going to happen. But we'll get there. Romeo leaves to go and see Juliet. Note that when he does so, he's suddenly very excited at the prospect of spending the night with Juliet, so his emotions are just all over the place in this scene. The dude's never been stable for a day in his life. While Romeo spends the night with Juliet, Lord and Lady Capulet sit together with Count Paris in Act 3, Scene 4. Lord Capulet informs Paris that due to the unfortunate circumstances of his nephew dying, understatement of the week, am I right? They haven't had the time or the chance to convince Juliet to agree to marry him, but they very much want to move ahead with the plan. They even agree to move the wedding forward to this Thursday, and Lady Capulet is sent to Juliet's room to tell her the happy news. Now, as you can imagine, this won't be happy news for Juliet, and it also throws a wrench in the friar's carefully laid out plan. Like I said, nothing ever goes well for Romeo and Juliet for long, right? Let's look at how it all falls apart, shall we? So, this scene opens with Romeo and Juliet alone in her room. They have just spent the night together and now argue about whether it's morning already and Romeo has to leave. Interestingly enough, it's Juliet who insists that it's not morning yet, and Romeo is the one who tries to correct her. If you've watched my previous videos, you'll know that this is the exact opposite of their usual dynamic. However, when Juliet remains insistent, Romeo immediately resigns himself to his fate of death and agrees to stay. This seems to snap Juliet out of it, and she sends him away. The nurse comes to tell her that Lady Capulet is on her way to Juliet's room and that the lovers had better hurry up their goodbyes. Romeo leaves and Lady Capulet enters. When she finds her daughter crying, she is immediately very harsh with her and tells her that an excessive show of emotions is unbecoming of a woman and that it won't bring Tybalt back anyways. Mother of the year, I tell you. She then tells Juliet about her plan to send a man to Mantua to poison Romeo. Now, to her mother's face, Juliet pretends to agree with her plan, even seems to encourage it, but through some clever wordplays, she manages to make it sound like one thing while meaning the complete opposite. We will talk about this in more detail in the next video. Eventually, Lady Capulet gets to the heart of the issue and tells Juliet that she is supposed to marry Paris. Juliet immediately disagrees, saying that she'd rather marry Romeo, to which her mother says that she should tell her father that. Lord Capulet enters and is also slightly bemused at Juliet's tear-streaked appearance. He asks his wife if she hasn't told her the good news yet, to which Lady Capulet says that she has, but that Juliet refuses, which confuses Lord Capulet to no end. He's all like, "What do you mean you don't want to marry? Don't you know what a good match I've struck with Count Paris for you?" When Juliet repeats her refusal, Lord Capulet completely flies off the handle. He calls Juliet pretty much every name under the sun and threatens to kick her to the curb and entirely disown her. Remember, they live in a time period where a woman without a man had absolutely no agency. This would mean complete social ruin for Juliet. She tries to turn to her mother for help, but Lady Capulet essentially says the Shakespearean equivalent of, "You've made your bed, now lie in it," and leaves. Again, Mother of the Year. As a last resort, Juliet turns to the nurse for help, and the nurse's advice is interesting. This is going to be an entire video of its own, so put a pin in it. The long and short of it is, though, that she tells Juliet to forget about Romeo and marry Paris instead. Juliet again pretends to agree with the nurse and tells her to go tell her father that she'll be off to confession, but in actuality, she wants to see Friar Lawrence and ask him for advice. After all, he is the one who married her and Romeo, so he might have some ideas. At the end of the scene, Juliet is alone on stage and says this final line: "If all else fail, myself has the power to die." So once again, she threatens to kill herself. Now, after my summary of Act 3, Scene 2, this should not come as a surprise to you, but there's a little more to it. Again, we're going to talk about this in more detail in the video after the next one, so put a pin in it for now. So, now that we all know what's what, let's look at Romeo and Juliet's conversation in the beginning of the scene, which, unbeknownst to them, is the last conversation they will ever have with each other. The scene opens with something seemingly simple to the point of being almost trivial: an argument about birds. Initially, Juliet says that Romeo doesn't need to go because it was the nightingale and not the lark that pierced the fearful hollow of thine ear. Now, nightingales are birds that sing in the evening, and larks are birds that sing in the morning. So essentially, Juliet is saying, "Why are you leaving? It's not morning yet." Romeo counters with, It was the lark, the herald of morn, no nightingale. Look, love, what envious streaks do lace the severing clouds in yonder east. He doesn't just say that it was the lark that he heard sing, but also that he can see dawn breaking on the horizon, further evidence of morning approaching. Now, it would be easy to say that this is just the love struck ramblings of two lovers who don't want to say goodbye just yet. But it does go a little deeper than that. The nightingale and the lark become symbols, things that literally and metaphorically stand for something else. The lark, as a bird that sings in the morning, stands for reality closing in on Romeo and Juliet, whereas the nightingale, a bird that sings in the evening, stands for the continuation of their love and desire. In other words, the nightingale represents the world Romeo and Juliet wish they could stay in, while the lark represents the world they actually have to live in. This also continues the connection of Romeo and Juliet's love to the night. They can only love each other safely in the dark. In the light of day, they run the risk of being discovered. And like I also said in the summary, it's interesting that Juliet is the one who denies reality initially and insists that Romeo can stay. So far in the play, she has been the more rational and practical one. Upon her insistence, however, Romeo pivots and agrees to stay. His exact words are, "Let me be ta'en, let me be put to death. I am content, so thou wilt have it so. I'll say yon grey is not the morning's eye, 'tis but the pale reflex of Cynthia's brow, nor that it is not the lark whose notes do beat the vaulty heaven so high above our heads. I have more care to stay than will to go. Come, death, and welcome, Juliet wills it so. How is't, my soul? Let's talk, it is not day." He completely accepts her words as true. It was the nightingale, not the lark, and this is not dawn. He agrees to stay despite knowing that this will likely mean his death because Juliet wills it so. And that's reason enough for him. Now, on the one hand, this shows his complete and utter devotion to Juliet, which is already a little more worrying than simply romantic. If she wants him to stay, then he stays, even if it costs him his life. But it also reveals something we've seen from Romeo before, his tendency to surrender to fate rather than resist it. We've already seen this in Act 3, Scene 1, when he called himself Fortune's Fool after killing Tybalt. Whenever something goes wrong, Romeo tends to see himself as a victim of forces beyond his control. Fate acts, and Romeo accepts it without question. Now, when Juliet is faced with the prospect of losing Romeo, she changes her tune pretty quickly and says, it is, meaning it is morning. Hie hence, be gone, away. It is the lark that sings so out of tune, straining harsh discords and unpleasing sharps." So she becomes rational again, meaning they're back to their original roles. This return becomes even more apparent in lines 51 to 53. Juliet asks, "Oh, thinkst thou we shall ever meet again?" And Romeo replies, "I doubt it not, and all these woes shall serve for sweet discourses in our times to come." So Juliet is once again the doubtful one, the one who immediately worries about the practical consequences of their situation. Romeo, on the other hand, remains the optimist. He basically says the Shakespearean equivalent of, "Don't worry, darling, we'll laugh about this in a few weeks." This is followed by Juliet having a premonition about Romeo's death. She says, "O God, I have an ill divining soul. Methinks I see thee now, thou art so low, as one dead in the bottom of a tomb." Now, this once again works on both the literal and the metaphorical level. Romeo is so low because he just climbed out of Juliet's window and is now standing below in the orchard again. But in Juliet's vision, he is so low because he is lying dead at the bottom of a tomb, which is exactly how Juliet will see him next, dead in the Capulet tomb from drinking poison. This is one of the clearest examples of foreshadowing in the entire play. And Shakespeare has not been very subtle with the foreshadowing so far, has he? After Romeo has left, Juliet turns her attention to fate and says this: O fortune, fortune, all men call thee fickle. If thou art fickle, what dost thou with him that is renowned for faith? Be fickle, fortune, for then I hope thou wilt not keep him long, but send him back. She's talking directly to fortune or fate here, repeating the common idea that fortune is fickle before almost daring it. Well, if you really are fickle, then prove it. Don't keep Romeo away, but bring him back to me. Notice how different this is from Romeo's response to fate. He has the tendency to just accept it lying down, but Juliet tries to argue with it, tries to outwit it by using logic. The tragedy is, of course, that the audience already knows this won't work. Fate cannot be negotiated with, and Romeo and Juliet's fate has always been written in the stars. That tragic ending was always inevitable. All right, so as we can see, the play has steadily escalated its stakes. From the Capulet Ball, where Romeo and Juliet first meet, over their private conversation in the Capulet Orchard, to their secret wedding, followed by Romeo and Tybalt's confrontation in the streets of Verona, leading to Tybalt's and Mercutio's death and Romeo's banishment. The rest of Act 3 is largely concerned with the consequences of these events. Juliet learns about Romeo's banishment and despairs. Romeo learns about his own banishment and despairs. The friar comes up with a reasonable plan of action, but doesn't account for Juliet's parents moving her wedding to Paris forward, which accelerates the rushed timeline even further and closes Romeo and Juliet off from even more options. Their opening conversation in Act 3, Scene 5 is the last private moment they will have together, even though neither of them knows it yet. Shakespeare allows the lovers to have one last quiet scene before the family conflict takes center stage. In their conversation, they argue whether it is the nightingale or the lark that sings, although their conversation is about more than that. The birds symbolize reality versus the lovers' desire to remain together. Night would mean they could continue to be together, but daylight forces them apart. In light of this, Juliet briefly abandons her usual rationality and practicality and convinces Romeo that it is the nightingale that sings. But faced with the prospect of losing him forever, she quickly changes her mind and sends him away. The scene also continues the play's recurring concern with fate. Romeo surrenders to it, but Juliet tries to argue with it, even outwitted through the use of logic, which the audience already knows won't work. From here, the focus of the scene shifts away from Romeo and Juliet as a couple and onto Juliet's confrontation with her family, starting with Lady Capulet, her mother. But that's going to be the subject of my next video. For now, this is me signing off. Emphasize, which turns Romeo. Juliet is no longer part of the equation, apparently. Straining harsh discords. Shakespeare quotes, I tell you. And in this heat, stay hydrated, people. Thanks everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like, share, and comment down below. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you don't want to miss any of my future videos. I also have a Patreon that you can subscribe to, starting at as little as $2 a month, which gives you early access to any of my videos. Higher tiers include access to exclusive Patreon-only content and the chance to suggest books, plays, or poems for any future analysis. For now, that is it from me, and I'll see you next time.